You're standing in a store, or maybe you're scrolling through your phone at 11 p.m., and you see something. You don't need it. You literally said to yourself 3 days ago, I need to stop spending money. But somehow, 20 minutes later, it's in your cart, and you're entering your card details. And the wild part? You're not even that excited about it anymore. You already feel a little guilty. But you bought it anyway. If that sounds familiar, stay right here, because we're about to get into something that most financial channels completely ignore, the emotional machinery that drives almost every financial decision you make. My name is Ben, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology behind why people spend money they don't have on things they don't really want. If you're someone who works hard, knows the basics of budgeting, and still somehow finds yourself at the end of the month wondering where it all went, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, we're not talking about spreadsheets, we're talking about your brain, your emotions, and the invisible forces that are quietly draining your bank account every single month. Here's the thing. Most financial advice operates on the assumption that if you just know better, you'll do better. That if someone shows you a pie chart of your spending, you'll suddenly fix everything. But here's what most people don't realize. Knowing and doing are controlled by completely different parts of your brain. The knowing part is your prefrontal cortex, logical, slow, calculating. The doing part is your limbic system, emotional, fast, and absolutely not interested in your 5-year savings plan. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that over 90% of purchasing decisions have an emotional trigger at their core, even when people believe they're being rational. Think about that. You tell yourself you bought that new gadget because it was practical or on sale, but the truth is something else entirely drove that decision. The logic came after. Your brain basically wrote a justification after the emotional decision was already made. This is called post-purchase rationalization, and it's one of the most powerful and least talked about forces in personal finance. You feel the urge to buy, you buy, and then your brain constructs a perfectly reasonable-sounding story for why it was a smart move. And because the story sounds reasonable, you believe it, and the cycle starts all over again next month. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I'm not out here making emotional purchases. I'm pretty logical with my money. And I hear that. But let me ask you something. Have you ever bought food you didn't plan to buy because you had a long, stressful day at work? Have you ever upgraded something, your phone, your car, your apartment, right around the time something hard was happening in your personal life? Have you ever bought something just because a friend or family member had it and you felt a weird low-level pressure you couldn't quite name? Those are emotional purchases, and they're not signs that you're bad with money, they're signs that you're human. Research from Harvard Business Review has shown that stress is one of the strongest predictors of impulse spending, particularly in the $20 to $200 range, which is exactly the range that quietly bleeds most people's budgets dry over time. It's not the one big purchase you regret, it's the 1,000 small ones you barely remember making. Here's another big one, and this is where it gets really interesting. Something called retail therapy is a real documented psychological response. When you're experiencing emotional discomfort, your brain actively seeks relief, and purchasing something creates a small but measurable dopamine spike. The problem is that spike is short-lived. The discomfort returns, and now you also have slightly less money. So you're not just spending, you're self-medicating with your own bank account. Let's put some real numbers on this, because I think when you see it in dollars and cents, it hits differently. The average American spends approximately $1,800 per year on impulse purchases, according to a Slick Deals survey. That's $150 a month. Now, look, $150 doesn't sound catastrophic on its own, but let's think about what $150 a month actually represents over time, because this is the part that most people skip.
If you took that $150 every month and invested it in a basic index fund averaging a 7% annual return, which is a conservative historical average for broad market index funds, over 20 years, you'd have approximately $78,000. Not from a massive investment, not from some complicated financial strategy, just from redirecting the money you're already spending on things you bought in a moment of emotional impulse and probably don't even use anymore. That's sitting in storage rooms, junk drawers, and closets all over the country. And here's the thing, this isn't about being miserable and never buying anything nice. This is about understanding that when you spend unconsciously, you are literally trading your future financial security for a dopamine hit that lasts about 48 hours. That's not a moral judgment. That's just the math of what's happening.
Look, I want to be clear about something. This isn't entirely your fault, and I mean that genuinely. There are billion-dollar industries built specifically around exploiting these emotional patterns. The entire architecture of modern retail, both physical and digital, is engineered to move you from emotional state to purchase as quickly as possible, before your prefrontal cortex has time to catch up and say, wait, do I actually need this? One-click buying removes friction. Limited-time offers create artificial urgency. Only 3 left in stock triggers scarcity anxiety. Buy now, pay later services, which have exploded in popularity among 25 to 40-year-olds, psychologically separate the pleasure of the purchase from the pain of paying, which research consistently shows leads to larger and more frequent purchases. A 2022 study from the Financial Health Network found that frequent BNPL users were significantly more likely to report financial stress and carry higher overall debt loads than non-users. The product is convenient. The consequence is invisible until it isn't. Social media adds another layer that previous generations didn't have to deal with. You're now exposed to curated highlight reels of other people's lifestyles at a rate that is genuinely unprecedented in human history. And your brain, which evolved to keep track of social status within a community of maybe 150 people, is now processing thousands of social comparison signals every single day. That's not neutral. That's a constant low-grade emotional pressure that influences spending in ways most people aren't even aware of. Now here's what most people don't realize. You can't think your way out of emotional spending with more information alone. What actually works is changing the environment and the timing of your decisions. This isn't about willpower. Willpower is a finite resource, and it's one of the least reliable tools in personal finance. What works is structure. The 48-hour rule is one of the simplest and most effective interventions financial psychologists talk about. When you feel the urge to buy something that wasn't planned, you simply wait 48 hours. Not forever, just 48 hours. What researchers have found is that a significant percentage of impulse purchase urges simply dissolve within that window. The emotional trigger fades, the dopamine craving passes, and you find yourself looking at the item 2 days later thinking, why did I want that so badly? It sounds almost too simple, but the reason it works is because you're creating a gap between the emotional trigger and the action, and in that gap, your logical brain has a chance to participate in the decision. Another shift that works is what behavioral economists call pre-commitment. This means making financial decisions when you're in a calm, future-oriented state, not when you're stressed, tired, hungry, or emotionally activated. Setting up automatic transfers to savings on payday is pre-commitment. Deciding in advance what your monthly discretionary budget is and putting that exact amount in a separate account is pre-commitment. You're essentially making decisions for your future emotional self because you know that future self is going to face triggers you can't predict right now. The third shift is arguably the deepest one, and it's about identifying what the spending is actually trying to solve. If you notice you spend more when you're stressed at work, the spending isn't really about the product, it's about needing stress relief. If you buy things when you're lonely, the purchase is standing in for connection. If you upgrade things when you're feeling behind in life, the spending is responding to anxiety about your own progress. None of this makes you broken, but once you can see the real need underneath the purchase, you can start addressing that need directly, which is both cheaper and more effective. Here's what I want you to actually do with this. Not next month, this week. Go back through your last 30 days of bank or card statements and look for patterns.
Not just categories, but timing. Did you spend more on certain days, after certain types of events, when you were traveling, when something was stressful at home? You're not doing this to beat yourself up. You're doing it to gather data on your own emotional spending triggers, because you can't change a pattern you haven't identified yet. Once you've found even one pattern, you have something real to work with. Maybe it's late-night online shopping. Maybe it's weekend brunches that somehow turn into afternoon shopping. Maybe it's food delivery every time a difficult conversation happens at home. Whatever it is, now you know. And knowing the specific trigger is completely different from the vague general feeling of, I just spend too much. From there, design one friction point, just one. Move the shopping apps off your home screen. Put a small sticky note on your card that says 48 hours. Set up one automatic savings transfer, even if it's just $25. These aren't massive changes, but they work precisely because they interrupt the automatic link between emotional trigger and spending behavior. And that interruption is where financial change actually begins. The reason most people struggle with money isn't because they don't understand compound interest. It isn't because they never heard that they should save. It's because no one ever taught them to look at the emotional layer underneath their financial behavior. And that layer is running the show, far more than most of us want to admit. Understanding that doesn't make you a victim of your own psychology. It makes you someone who can actually work with it instead of against it. If this gave you a different way of thinking about your spending, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below telling me the one spending trigger you identified. I read every one. And if you want to go deeper into the behavioral side of building wealth, there's a lot more on this channel worth your time. I'll see you in the next one.